Hey, hello everyone. Hi, Ruth. Welcome back to Whispers of Inner Power. This is a space where we explore what it means to build a life and business that honors our sensitivity, our truth, and our unique rhythms. Today, I'm so happy to be joined by Ruth Poundwhite. We first connected through her beautiful membership, the Soulful Society, and I remember feeling such deep resonance in your work, Ruth. It made me realize that I wasn't the only one seeing and feeling things this way. And it reminded me that maybe I wasn't completely crazy for wanting to do business differently. So, whether you are navigating burnout, softness, the pressure to do more, to be more, I think this conversation is going to land deeply for you. Welcome, Ruth. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us a bit more about you?
Well, firstly, thank you for that lovely intro. Like that really made me smile. Thank you. I am an online business and self-belief coach. I started my own online business journey as a copywriter way back in 2008. Went on a whole journey of figuring out like how I really want to run my business, not resonating with loads of advice, finding it really difficult, beating myself up, thinking I wasn't cut out for this long and winding journey. And that's how I came to support people with running their own business in alignment with who they really are instead of
Mhm.
trying to be someone else. And especially also in alignment with our capacity, because my capacity is so much less than it used to be. So it's really important to find a way that is sustainable for me, that is sustainable for all of us in our unique needs.
Yeah, exactly. I resonate with everything you're saying. And it's fascinating to know that you've been in the online world for almost 2 decades. You must have seen all the changes and transformations.
Yeah. It's so different now. It's wild, but I totally fell into it by accident back then. Like I had no idea that I was about to enter this whole world that I didn't know about back then. Yeah.
I think none of us did. In the written interview, you mentioned, yes, the fact of being a copywriter for so long and then not really feeling connected or even not accepting the rules of traditional marketing. And you mentioned a fuck it moment after having your child. Can I ask you, what did it look like in practice to start showing up more as yourself after that?
Well, the interesting thing is, and I really always want to be clear about this, is that on the outside, it kind of looked like one day I was just doing my copywriting business. And then the next day, I was on Instagram, I was talking, I was sharing stuff, I was building this new business. What it really was behind the scenes was years of trying to get out of the copywriting and support other businesses. Like I knew I wanted to do it for years, and I never really did anything publicly with it. Like I wrote a few blog posts, I bought some courses, I had some ideas. And I know now, I didn't know this back then, but I know now that it was a huge, self-doubt thing. Like I was really scared. It was so much easier for me to continue doing actually what I knew in my heart that I didn't want to do, because I didn't have to be visible as myself. I was kind of, I never built my brand. I did build a brand based on me, but I didn't really show my personality or share anything personal. And I think that's fine. You can build a business that way. But I knew for me, it actually wasn't really what I wanted to do, but it was easier because it was safer. And
Mhm.
then I had my son at the end of 2017. And I went through, I had maternity leave from my business. I had built it up in advance, planned things in advance, decided to take like 5 months off. And thank goodness, because I had a really terrible time with my mental health after I had him. And I think this like fuck it moment was basically because I had been to this place mentally that was just so dark. I was like, I am, and when I was not at the time when I was in it, but when I was coming out of it again and I had gotten support for my mental health and things like that, I just felt so ready to change things. Like it all from the outside, it would seem like it was an overnight change.
Mhm.
I hired a coach. I stopped lurking in all the spaces I was lurking in, like the courses I bought and stuff, and actually started posting in the groups and stuff. That was actually a really important shift for me in terms of getting more confident, being visible. And yeah, I just started sharing my journey on Instagram. I didn't have anything to sell yet, but so technically it wasn't a proper business because I wasn't selling anything yet, but in my mind, that's when I started this new business, because I had made the decision to get visible. It was it was partly because I'd been to that difficult place mentally, and I just thought, well, that's as bad as it gets,
Yeah.
but it was also because now I had a son, and there's just something about, like, you want your child to do the thing that's in their heart as they grow, and I felt like I want to be that example for him. And it just,
Exactly.
and I gave that quote. I think I gave the quote in the written interview, which is, the risk it took to remain tight in a bud was greater than the risk it took to blossom. So it just, the scale tipped, and it's shifted very quickly once that moment came. But like I said, it had been years of stopping and starting. I'm feeling very frustrated with myself behind the scenes before this moment.
Yeah, I completely get that, and I really feel the same way. Felt the same transformation inside out once I became a mom. But for me, it was my second child, because my daughter was born before I started my business. She was born in 2012. I started in 2017. My son was born in 2021, and that's very similar. Not in the same way, but I really felt like, first I burned out. That's the first thing. I
Yeah.
didn't have the 5 months. I took 3 weeks because I was terrified that I would lose everything I had built, that I would lose momentum, that I would not have the financial safety and stability to live, basically. So I took 3 weeks and I powered through like I can. I'm the, let's go. And yeah, I completely burned out and I stopped everything for 2 years. And those 2 years were super transformative. And just like you mentioned, like for me too, it was a very dark moment for my mental health. I feel, oh, you think, it's your burnout and then you stop and then you feel better. You
Yeah.
don't. It's you feel worse for a long time. It's exhaustion and tears and deep, deep healing.
Yeah.
But for me, it took that time to, I think, not identify so much to my business. Not to
Yeah.
think, this the results, the sales, the non-sales, the whatever happens is not tied to my worth as a person, to who I am. So I get to experiment. So I get to play with it. So I get to be vulnerable and to show myself exactly as I am. And it's imperfect. And it's sometimes I speak too much. And sometimes I overshare. And sometimes whatever. I have my moods. I'm a human being. Um, and whatever. And I really like that example you shared about being the model for our children. We want them to be full in themselves. We want them to follow their dreams and to really do what matters and not to enter the little boxes. Then we must do it first. We must show them that it's possible. And you did it for your son, but you do it for all of us. Because like I mentioned at the beginning, for me, finding you meant that. It's like, oh, she's doing exactly that. And you're talking about how messy it is, and you navigate chronic fatigue, and you I mean, your business is such a source of inspiration, and you bring so many tools for everyone. It's a beautiful way of blossoming. So, I mean, you're not looking for a validation, but wow.
Thank you. Well, it's always nice to hear, isn't it? And I
Yes.
will say, actually, what you shared about, well, firstly, untying the self-worth from the business, I mean, that's been a whole journey for me as well. But also being able to allow yourself to show up imperfectly. I think that was it. Like, before, in my previous business, I was just so terrified. I was terrified of even showing my face in a photo, let alone on a video, and sharing my opinions and things like that.
Mm,
But what I came to learn when I had that moment and I started getting visible is, every time I was showing up on Instagram or wherever I was like, I'm really scared right now, or, oh, I need to go and hide right now. And I just, or I would do a video and I would have my quirky little ways or whatever. And actually, what I learned was that made it so much safer for me to show up, because I wasn't hiding. It meant that then I couldn't be found out in the way that I was worried about. Like, so when I started working with, so eventually I built some offers up and I started coaching clients one-to-one, and I felt like they knew me. Even though we hadn't met before, they knew what I was like.
exactly.
They knew that I was nervous and doing it anyway. They knew that I was imperfect. They knew that how I talked and all this, and it just made it so much safer for me. It was such
Yeah.
a revelation, and just that honesty was a huge part of why it worked, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I feel that. Also because there's no more gap between you know, who are tempted to show we are professionally and who we really are. I think that, I just wrote a post about it a few days ago. Like it's like signing a contract with imposter syndrome when you want to appear a
Mm.
certain way, but that's not who you are, how you talk to your friends. Like, oh, I have to keep up with the persona I've been building. But if you're not doing that, if you're showing up messy and imperfect, then there's no need to hide anything.
Yeah,
That's
and
who
it's
I
so
am.
hard. Like, it chips away at your soul, and
Yeah,
if you feel when you're listening to this that, "Oh, I am doing that and I do feel different," it's not you being deceptive or whatever. It's a protection mechanism. I really felt like that in my previous business. I really just felt like I was two different people almost, and it really chipped away at me, like, but I didn't understand it. I didn't know why I was acting that way. I wasn't deliberately doing it, but
exactly.
it such a shift when I
Yeah.
started just showing up as myself.
Yeah, thank you so much for mentioning that because the point is not to make anyone feel guilty because they're doing it. We've been there. It's like
Yeah,
it's a
exactly.
natural coping mechanism
Mhm.
like you say. And yeah, for me it's like it's years of, and I think it's part of the burnout, honestly. It's this people think burnout equals you work too hard, but there's this pressure to perform.
Yeah.
That's for me, that was what pushed me into burnout. I had anxiety because of that, not because it was so different, because it was always a performance. It's always like, and
Mhm.
now I need to be the one who has the answer, the one who knows better. Well, sometimes I don't know better. So sometimes,
Yeah.
it's just we have our experiences. We learn from these insights of years of experiences and trying and this and that, but there's no perfect way to live. There is not one way to do things, but there's a way maybe to find ourselves so we can journey on. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
that. Ruth, you mentioned that you had chronic fatigue and that this reshaped the way that you measure success in your business today. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
So in 2020, I don't think it was a COVID thing. I don't think I had COVID, but I do think it was probably triggered in some way by the mental side of the COVID time. I started experiencing chronic fatigue where I was just like really tired all the time. And I had this, what they call, was it post exertional malaise? So, like, if I did exercise, I'd be like having aches and pains and couldn't tolerate exercise and all of this stuff. And, if anyone has been through this kind of chronic health stuff, you'll know it's really hard to get medical professionals to take you seriously, and often you get a kind of absence of a diagnosis. So anyway, long story short, it took me a long time to, because I kept thinking it was in my head as well, and this is a common experience a lot of us have.
Mm,
And it fluctuates. So sometimes I am okay. So I kid myself. I think, am I imagining the whole thing? Um, but yeah, basically chronic fatigue syndrome. And it does fluctuate, and my energy is not, sometimes I have a lot more energy to do a lot more, but what it has meant for my business has been massive. So if I think about myself, especially working in my first business before I had a child, I mean, even having a child and just getting older is going to affect things anyway. But my capacity is so reduced. I, even if I have the time, I don't have the mental clarity to just work for hours on end. Brain fog is a huge symptom of mine. And if anyone has experienced it, you'll know it's really debilitating, even though it sounds a bit like wishy-washy, but it's actually such a debilitating symptom, especially when you're working on your own business. And I think one of the examples I gave on the written interview is like I had to drastically reduce the amount of calls in my schedule. I realized, so what you go through this process of getting to know yourself when you have a condition or illness like this, and learning what your triggers are. It's never as like easy as that makes it sound, because it sometimes you just can't figure it out, and sometimes the trigger happens and then days go by and you can't put two and two together. But basically I did realize one of my triggers was just having client calls, so I had to make the decision to drastically reduce calls in my calendar. I stopped doing one-to-one calls with my clients and started doing asynchronous coaching, which is, like messaging on Voxer. And I shut down my group program and I made a decision to shift my business model to more like one-to-many kind of offers. So my membership that you've talked about being like the main one, and shifted my working hours, just all of these kind of subtle changes. And I used to be really, really, like, honestly, my group program before that was the thing that I wanted to grow and scale and do forever. And it was like such a big decision to make these changes. And I it's really hard. Like, do I want to have the chronic fatigue? No, but has it taught me a lot of valuable lessons? Yes. And I am someone who massively has tied my identity to my work and my results and my business. And when you can't work, or when you have to cut it way back, or I mean, I also have periods where my mental health is not great and I just really have not been interested in work. That has been a real shift for me. So talking about redefining success, I was like, what even is there?
Mm.
I had this moment, when was it? Probably last year. So I had a really bad mental health period and I just stopped caring about my work for a period. And it was really interesting. And I thought, although this is really awful, in some ways, I think this might be a good thing, because I'm so tired. So, you know what it's like. We can untangle some of this stuff, or we can think that we've got through it, and then it can show
Of
up
course.
again later. This is kind of how this is one of my main kind of core, what's the word, like core wounds and stories, is like this: my self-worth is tied to my results, tied to my work, tied to my success. And I just started to question, well, what does that success even mean? And I remember talking to a coach at the time. And they're like, what do you want to do? I was trying to come up with new offer ideas. And I just kept thinking I had to replace this group program, actually, because when I stopped this group program, I thought it was going to be a temporary decision. But it turns out it wasn't. And I was just like, you know what? All I want to do is go in my garden and grow flowers. And like, that's all I want to do. And you should see like the flowers in my garden this summer as a result of what I did. Started last summer and then continued through the autumn, through the winter, like sowing seeds, nurturing them. And my garden is now full of flowers because of what started last year. And that is a version of success. That is successful to me. But it's been really, there's been these two parts of my brain, like one part
Mhm.
saying that's not good enough and that's not enough, or you
Yeah.
were more ambitious than this. And it's like, I still am ambitious, but I think that it has really shifted. And at first I was really, actually, I say at first, probably still now, and again, it fluctuates, like really didn't want to admit that to myself,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
it's changed. But actually, it in many ways, it's so much more meaningful. Like I do care about my business. And when things are so out of balance and your energy is not there, I think it's what happened to me last year with my mental health was probably, and the fact that I went from, getting on with things as normal to just not caring. I think it
Mhm.
was my body's way of, protecting me and totally getting its priorities straight.
Mhm.
I had
Mhm.
to just care for myself. Um, and that started with literally caring for myself like I was a flower. So like, do I need feeding? Do I need watering? Do I need some sun?
Yeah.
And then, going on from there. So I feel like that was such a long-winded answer, but yeah,
No, it's
my
perfect
definition of
because
success is massively changing.
yeah, I love that, and I recognize so much in that. And at the beginning, when that happened to me, not the mental health thing, although I think it's also something. Thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to say that as you were uh, talking. I have ADHD, so I tend to refrain myself from interrupting, and then like forget the notes I wanted to make.
Yeah.
But um, I think it's important to underline that for anyone listening, because we often have these stories, especially on social media and from successful people like you to be like, oh, I have now overcome this. But we don't overcome this. We're all on a journey, and it's like you say, it fluctuates. Sometimes you feel better, sometimes you don't, sometimes you have energy, sometimes you don't, sometimes you feel I've learned the lesson about tying my self-worth to my business, but then 6 months from now it happens again, because
Mhm.
that's what life is. We're all on a journey of, I think, learning who we are and embracing who and loving ourselves. And that goes in a spiral up. It's not like it's a linear thing. I've learned my lesson now and everything's so much better. But yeah, I've recently posted about it as well, to say, I used to have the ambition of making lots of money through my business and serving as many people as possible. And that was just before I stopped. And now I came back a bit less than a year ago. And now my ambition is literally to enjoy my daily life,
Mm.
is to have the space when I wake up in the morning, to have time with my children, to have my coffee, to paint, to write for myself because I love writing, and then just working the hours that I know I'm working, and it's meaningful, and I stop at a certain time and I go to bed with a good book. And if my life looks like this every day, then it's successful. Then I'm happy. Like, it's great to have a good bank account. I'm happy about it too, but it's not the main name of the game. It's about
Mhm.
enjoying every day as you're building that. You don't have to suffer your way through through the traditional meaning of success. So I completely get it. I'm really happy for your garden. You have to share a picture of it.
Yeah, these cosmos, seriously, they're like as tall as me. And to deadhead them, I have to like climb up to actually reach in the middle. Honestly, yeah, I love them.
And you mention your garden a lot in your newsletter. So I love that, how you actually share that behind the scenes of what's happening in your life. For the people listening to us, if you were to say something to the version of yourself that was still hiding behind the big hat and the shadow, what would you say to her that would also resonate with them?
It just popped it straight into my head was like, you have something important to say and the way that you want to say it. And I remember when I first had this, because we're talking about like inner whispers, I had what I called inner nudge to like start podcasts. It just like came at me and I was like, hello, there's no way that I'm the person to start a podcast. But it was there. I don't know where it came from.
Mm.
And I remember thinking, I am not the person because I am not good at having conversations. I'm not good at asking questions. I'm not confident. I can't record myself, whatever. And turns out that starting my podcast was one of the best decisions I made. And I realized that I am good at having conversations. I don't have to have loads of small talk on a podcast. That really helps. We get straight into the deep stuff. And, it resonated with people. And yes, there were, and another one of my stories was there are loads of other people doing it. Why would anyone want to listen to you? And that's, I guess, that message. Like, you do have something to say that's important in the way that you uniquely say it. Um, it was very hard for me to believe. It took a lot of doing it before I believed it to get there. And even now, I don't always believe it, but it's definitely true.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We're going to close there because it's impactful. Thank you so much for your time, Ruth. I will add in the description your website, your Instagram, the membership that I really recommend people joining, and there was a freebie as well that you mentioned there. I put everything in the description. Thank you so much for this generous interview and all your insights. I had shivers several times. Thank you for all your stories, and we'll catch up soon.
Thank you.